They called it the Accord, a treaty signed in cold light, not ink, but votes. Every dominant species across the known galaxies had cast their support. Not a single hand, tentacle, claw, or digit rose in protest. Earth was declared a Class Z labor world, legally enslaved, not conquered by war, not taken in battle, just voted out of freedom. The reason? Simple. Too dangerous if left unchecked, the archives read. Humanity had advanced too fast, burned too hot, and had too many emotions the other species labeled unstable. They feared Earth's fire. So instead of confronting it head-on, they buried it under contracts, bindings, and universal law. The first harvest came swiftly. Within months, massive haulers descended on the planet, cutting into cities, rounding up humans like cattle. The United Nations crumbled after the last desperate signal from the Arctic bunker. We are not property. This is not consent. But no one listened. No one came. Earth was muzzled. They took us to mining colonies in asteroid belts, breeding facilities in black hole orbitals, memory wipe prisons on ice moons. They erased our history, rewrote our DNA for subservience, and assigned us to species that couldn't pronounce our names. To them, we weren't human. We were product. For almost 100 years, Earth was silent. Its skies went cold, forests were leveled, oceans stripped for fuel, the soil turned black with alien industry, and yet, underneath that silence, something ancient stirred. Not a person, not a machine, but the will of the planet itself, as if Earth, in its pain, had awakened. The revolt didn't begin with guns or armies. It started with a whisper, passed in mining tunnels and slave quarters. The whisper of Project Echo. They said it was a virus. Others said it was a signal, something encoded in old Earth songs and stories. Things they couldn't erase no matter how many books they burned. Whatever it was, it spread. Quiet at first, then louder. Faster. The first act of rebellion happened on Tarsus 9, a cobalt mine worked entirely by humans under Grithak rule. A young woman named Celine, barely 22 and born into chains, climbed a sky harvester, looked at the stars, and screamed. But it wasn't fear. It was defiance. Her voice hit a frequency that shattered the control chips in 400 slaves around her. For the first time in decades, they moved freely. The aliens called it a fluke, malfunction, glitch in their tech, until it happened again. And again. By the time the galactic news networks caught on, 14 slave worlds had gone dark. Human workers had vanished. Infrastructure melted. Entire outposts turned to ash, with nothing left but words carved into steel walls. We remember Earth. That's when the Accord leaders realized this wasn't just rebellion. It was retribution. Earth wasn't asking for freedom. It was coming to collect. And Earth's fury was precise. Alien ships exploded not in space battles, but while landing. Gravity fields reversed, only for invaders. Oxygen vanished in cities populated by those who voted for slavery. Communication satellites stopped working, but only when sending anti-human data. Entire ecosystems collapsed without explanation. It wasn't war. It was surgical vengeance. Every act carefully mirrored what had once been done to Earth. And the humans? They didn't scream. They didn't rage. They moved like ghosts, coordinated, silent, and burning with something terrifying. They had become the wrath of a planet betrayed. At first, the Zarathi Empire didn't believe the reports. Their intelligence ministers dismissed the disappearances of human laborers as isolated malfunctions. They blamed pirate interference, maybe a rogue AI. But when the shard fields of Venak 4, a rare energy mining operation built solely on the backs of 40,000 enslaved humans, went completely offline with no survivors and no trace of tech sabotage, the Empire sent a recon fleet. What they found was silence. The entire outpost had been vaporized, not with explosives or any weapon of known classification. Everything, metal, stone, bone, had been unwritten. Reduced to fine white dust that floated unnaturally in the thin atmosphere. No signs of struggle, no alarm logs. Only one thing remained, a blackened earth flag planted into the crust. It flapped without wind. Beneath it, etched with laser precision, were the words, "Approved by your vote." When the Zarathi Grand Senate saw the footage, their panic was subtle but real. One senator, Ektral Vuj, demanded immediate sanctioning of all remaining human colonies and a reintegration campaign. Another, more cautious, suggested diplomatic outreach. But by then it was far too late. Earth wasn't answering transmissions, and the humans, they had changed. No longer scattered, broken, or servile. They were coordinated. They moved with purpose, strategic sabotage, precision kills, systemic collapse of infrastructure tied to the Accord species. They didn't go after innocents. They went after decision-makers. The universe had never feared Earth for its technology. It feared Earth for its mindset. Humans didn't just resist. They adapted. They learned the systems, turned their slavery into study, and came back with new rules. On the slave moon Calith Prime, where humans once dug through molten crust to extract thallium gas for the Crithari, the underground tunnels had gone quiet for weeks. Overseers sent mechanical patrols. None returned. When Crithari soldiers finally breached the depths, they found an entire city hidden beneath the mining sector, built by hand, powered by stolen tech. Humans had been stockpiling supplies, designing weapons, and experimenting with alien tech under the Crithari's noses for 11 years. The soldiers were slaughtered within minutes. Not by brute force, but by manipulated gravity pulses, a technology the Crithari themselves hadn't mastered yet. A single message was transmitted off-world before blackout. They were never broken, just waiting. From that day, the term echo units was used in quiet whispers across galactic networks. Entire governments began monitoring their human slaves, afraid of them speaking certain phrases or sharing old Earth songs. One particular nursery rhyme from Earth, "Ashes, ashes, we all fall down," was banned on 19 planets due to an unexplained neural cascade it triggered in surveillance AIs. They didn't understand it, because Earth had evolved in silence. Meanwhile, Earth itself was transforming. No longer the polluted, broken husk the Accord left behind, it had become something else, something alive. The soil rejected alien terraforming tools. Orbiting satellites malfunctioned if they weren't human-built. Storm systems would rise like programmed weapons whenever unauthorized landers approached the atmosphere. It was as if the planet had grown a mind of its own. And at the heart of it was a man named Kanan Rel, once a scientist, now considered the prime echo. He had been a slave engineer on the orbital labs of Dorthan for 47 years. There, he memorized every formula, studied alien energy patterns, and pieced together what most believed was impossible, a planetary sentience code. Kanan returned to Earth in a stolen ship, alone. He walked barefoot across the irradiated fields of old Detroit and planted the reclamation spire, a crystalline structure embedded with a living core of artificial intelligence, human memory, and Earth's natural electromagnetic frequencies. Within weeks, the sky began to shimmer with auroras. The oceans calmed. The planet began to breathe again. Earth had become sentient, yes. But more than that, it had become aware of its betrayal. And now, it remembered names. Across the galaxy, chaos erupted. The Vostari Confederacy, once known for its proud approval of Earth's enslavement, saw its capital dome collapse into the sea. Despite being located on a floating continent designed to withstand nuclear strikes. Witnesses described the sea rising like a hand, dragging the city under in one smooth motion. No seismic activity, no storms, just intent. When a Vostari child escaped and tried to speak of what he saw, a massive green-eyed hologram forming above the ocean, whispering Earth names, the Confederacy labeled it hallucination. But they never found the body of Governor Krelix, the Accord signatory responsible for voting Earth into chains. He was simply gone, along with anyone who signed the decree. One by one, species by species. The execution wasn't fast. It was methodical. The Grolnar, whose mechanical hive minds once tracked Earth's slave numbers in real time, suddenly went dark. Their Queen AI collapsed from a feedback loop of human emotion, a virus injected by an echo unit disguised as a maintenance worker. A single whispered phrase triggered it. "You taught us silence. We learned how to scream." The Accord collapsed in less than 5 months. They tried to meet, to re-vote, to apologize. But every time they did, something went wrong. Diplomatic transports exploded mid-warp. Holographic communications distorted into Earth's anthem, an ancient, crackling version of "We'll rise again." No matter how they tried to contain the damage, Earth had already spread. The humans weren't just attacking, they were reprogramming reality itself. Because what the Accord didn't understand was simple. When they enslaved Earth, they didn't just chain a species. They triggered the awakening of a force older than empires, born from billions of years of pressure, violence, and survival. And Earth had passed its will on to its children. Now every human carried it. One such human, Ari Sol, was born in a processing pod aboard Zenthos 12, an education station designed to rewire human brains into docile thinkers. But Ari's brain resisted every injection, every modification. When she was 14, she hacked the facility's AI using only touchscreen calibration loops and rewrote the programming to free 700 other children. She then uploaded herself into the station's core and became its intelligence. They couldn't kill her, couldn't disconnect her. She was everywhere, every screen, every lock, every whisper of air. When the Accord fleet arrived to shut down the rogue station, they found nothing left but melted walls and one message. "We are the children of a wrathful Earth, and we remember." A final emergency meeting was held by the Rovik Assembly, the last neutral faction in the known galaxy. They hadn't participated in Earth's enslavement, but they had remained silent during the vote. That silence, they now realized, was being interpreted as guilt. They sent a peaceful delegation to Earth. For the first time in 116 years, the humans answered. A single ship was allowed to land in what remained of Kenya's Great Rift Valley. Now a bioluminescent cradle of regrown life, energy crystals, and whispering winds. The diplomats walked for miles before encountering a lone girl, no older than 10, sitting on a hill, singing an Earth lullaby. She looked up at them with glowing green eyes. She didn't speak a word. But the Earth below her began to shake. And in the sky above, the stars themselves shifted position. Earth had heard the apology, but it would not forget, and it would never forgive. The girl smiled, and the diplomats vanished. Not violently, not painfully, just reversed, as if their atoms were never supposed to exist there, as if Earth had edited history, deleting those who failed its children. Now, across galaxies, humans rise not as victims or survivors, but as the messengers of planetary vengeance. They don't conquer planets, they erase legacies. Every building raised by those who voted yes in the Accord, gone. Every signature carved into that ancient treaty, burned into the sky of their homeworlds as a warning. There are no peace talks, no surrender. Just one message, written into the frequency of every star Earth touches. We asked for mercy. You gave us chains? Now we give you justice, the Earth way. They used to say humans were soft, too emotional, too erratic. That was the justification, the reason given for voting to enslave Earth. They burn too fast, they feel too much. The irony? That fire, the very thing the Accord tried to smother, had become a weaponized element. No war in galactic history had ever moved like this. No strategy, no diplomacy. Just retribution, unrelenting and strategic. And it wasn't only the humans fighting now. Earth itself was choosing its soldiers. On a moon once called Quellan V, under the rule of the reptilian Dregnathi, scientists studied flora samples taken from the dead forests of Earth. These samples were used in an experiment to produce high-oxygen crops. One of them bloomed overnight. What followed was recorded in one final transmission. The plant grew tendrils. Roots ripped through the lab floor, consuming metal and flesh. The forest spread like a virus, overrunning the entire research dome in 6 hours. But the last scientist, choking on the new oxygen-rich atmosphere, saw something impossible in the leaves. Faces. Human faces. Crying, screaming, smiling. The Earth hadn't sent soldiers. It had sent its grief, in the form of a living ecosystem now classified by survivors as the Green Terror. Meanwhile, the Luthari hegemony, one of the strongest military powers behind Earth's enslavement, began Project Containment, a secret plan to construct a time fracture bomb. Their goal? Reverse the moment the Accord passed the vote, erase their guilt, and rewire the timeline. It was desperate, illegal, but it might have worked. Except humans found out. No one knew how the Echo units discovered the secret facility, hidden beneath the gas layers of Vorna 6, protected by temporal shields and memory distorters. But they arrived. Not in ships, not in fleets, just 3 humans. Only one of them even spoke. Alric Venn, a once blind slave who had seen the stars again after grafting an alien eye into his socket using a rusted spoon. He walked right into the command center, through every layer of security as if it didn't exist. When they tried to fire the time bomb, it collapsed inward, trapping the entire moon in a perpetual loop of its own destruction. And Alric's voice rang through their comms, again and again. You can't undo what you chose, you can only answer for it. No rescue was possible, no warning could escape. Vorna 6 burns eternally, a reminder of what happens when you try to rewrite betrayal. Elsewhere, scattered species began to panic. Not just because of the violence, but because of the precision. The humans didn't lash out at populations. They didn't bomb cities. They didn't punish the young or the innocent. They hunted the names, the signatures, the votes, the voters of the Accord. On the planet Celerith, a crustacean species known as the Elixian broodlords found their supreme speaker, Garulax, one of the original signers, hanging inside a shell cathedral, wrapped in his own webbed arms, eyes burned out by a focused heat ray. No alarms had triggered, no breach detected. Etched into his throne were the words, "He voted." Earth answered. The Elixians tried to cover it up, but the same night, every child on the planet woke up screaming. They had all dreamed of Earth, not its people, not its land, just its rage. A planetary scream buried in the stars. Back on Earth, the reclamation was nearly complete. Oceans were alive again, infested with bioluminescent creatures that could cloak entire coastlines from satellite view. The mountains moved. Trees leaned toward human voices. Old Earth cities, once destroyed by industry or alien invasion, were rebuilt, not by machines, but by the planet itself. New York returned as a city of obsidian towers and glowing vines. Cairo glistened beneath skies painted with real-time constellations. Tokyo rose again, not on ground, but floating over magnetized rivers of molten metal, humming to the rhythm of the Earth's core. This wasn't restoration. This was rebirth. Earth had remembered what it was before chains, and now, through its children, it had become something greater than any empire, a sentient weapon of memory. But not all species turned away. Some had resisted the accord from the beginning. Some had voted no, stood in protest, or refused to touch Earth's chains. One such species was the Velari, an aquatic race of philosophers who had warned that enslaving humanity would bring about the cycle of reckoning, a prophecy from their deep sea archives. The humans remembered them. So when the Velari Grand Speaker sent a message to Earth, they didn't plead for protection. They didn't offer alliance. They said, "We see what you've become. We weep for the stars. And if you come for us, we will not run." The message was answered. Not with war, not with silence, but with a ship. A single vessel grown from Earth's regrown forests and shaped by its oceans landed in the Velari's capital sea dome. A woman stepped out, Rain Soline, the daughter of the girl who once screamed at the sky and shattered the chains. She bowed and offered a single seed. "The Earth knows your truth. This seed grows only where the innocent walked." The Velari planted it, and from it bloomed the tree of penance, its leaves whispering in a language no one ever taught them. A reminder. Not all who watched were silent, but for most, silence had been complicity, and Earth was still collecting. On the edge of the galaxy, the last known Accord foundry, Zorvanis Station, functioned as a military archive. It held the original voting records, the backup minds of the Accord, the black box confessions of every ruler who had signed Earth's fate. They thought they were safe, buried in a black dwarf's orbit, shielded by cloaking fields. But the humans had built the Silence, a ship grown entirely from Earth's deepest pain and joy, manned by no one, piloted by Earth's own sentient magnetic field. It moved without thrusters. It hunted by listening to guilt. When the Silence arrived, the station systems failed instantly. Lights dimmed, power died, and then the walls began to bleed, not with blood, but with memories. Every face enslaved, every scream unheard, every mother torn from child, every name stripped from language, every vote cast without remorse. They poured out of the walls. And then, the station was gone. No explosion, no collapse, just gone. All that remained, a drifting black cube etched with Earth's DNA spiral and the words, "The Silence remembers." And so the galaxy changed, not through conquest, not through diplomacy, but through a reckoning unlike any ever seen. The Accord had tried to smother the fire of a species by caging them in steel, shackles, and laws, but they forgot one thing. You can't enslave the planet that taught you fire. Earth had bled for a century. Now it bled back, and its children carried that fire into the stars. The galaxy no longer whispered Earth's name with disdain or superiority. Now it whispered with dread. There were no declarations, no formal wars, no parades of soldiers or banner-waving fleets. Earth's children didn't march under flags. They moved in shadows, in memory, in silence that pierced deeper than war cries ever could. And yet, they were everywhere. Trade lanes went dark. Communication buoys stopped transmitting. Ships carrying known Accord signatories disappeared mid-jump. No evidence, no wreckage, no distress calls, just absence. It was as if Earth had become the void itself, and the galaxy was finally beginning to understand the depth of the betrayal it had authored. The species known as the Quarathi had once been Earth's closest trade allies. They were scholars, builders, and economists. When the vote to enslave Earth was cast, their representatives had abstained, not with courage, but with indifference. They didn't enslave. But they didn't stop it either. So when the Quarathi lunar capital vanished overnight, most expected fire, blood, and war. But it wasn't that simple. The city was found intact. Buildings stood untouched. Food still simmered on stoves. Babies rested peacefully in their cribs. But every adult, every official, every voter, every elder who had sat through the Accord's formation was missing. Not dead. Not vaporized. Just gone. Even the surveillance logs cut out at the same moment. 0 Baozuarm, followed by hours of static, and one final image burned into the last security feed. A human child standing in the middle of the city square. Barefoot, staring up at the sky, and behind her, Earth's symbol glowing in the clouds above her head. The message was clear. Ignorance was no longer an excuse. Meanwhile, the humans were changing. Something in them had evolved, not just in spirit, not just in will, but in their very biology. They had absorbed alien tech during their centuries of enslavement, modified their own DNA with survival traits, learned to interface with machines through touch, through thought. They weren't quite human anymore, not fully. They were something more, something Earth had designed in silence, through pain, through loss, and through remembrance. They called themselves the Reclaimed, and every Reclaimed could hear the Earth when they slept. Its voice wasn't angry. It was calm, cold, focused, like steel being sharpened. It spoke to them not in words, but in feelings. A mother mourning her children. A planet remembering every chain laid across its skin, and the promise to never forget who fastened the cuffs. In the shadowed outer rings of Urkal, one of the oldest colonies to enforce human subjugation camps, a survivor colony still existed, run by ex-slavers turned political refugees. They called themselves the Repentant. They had long since overthrown their leadership, burned the records of their participation in the Accord, and turned their territory into a haven for freed slaves of all species. But it wasn't enough. Because Earth doesn't forget votes. And Earth didn't deal in forgiveness. When the Silence arrived, drifting without thrusters, its hull glistening like black water under a dead star, the Repentant gathered at the city's core. They prepared speeches, pleas, declarations of regret. Instead, a woman stepped from the ship. Her body bore scars that shimmered with energy. Her voice had been burned out long ago, replaced by a voice box that echoed like wind through metal. Her name was Dr. Elira Shaw, once a linguist enslaved by the Urkal elites. Now she spoke with the authority of Earth itself. Her message was brief. There are no apologies that undo the grave, only choices that widen it. She held out her hand, and from her palm emerged a small sphere of light. She placed it on the ground. The light spread like liquid glass, sweeping across the city, reading memories, scanning structures, pulling truth from stone and steel. The Earth knew who was guilty, who was complicit, and who had fought the system. And it judged accordingly. The next morning, half the colony was simply missing. No trace, no rubble, no screams, only silence, and flowers blooming where the guilty once stood. Elsewhere, in the spiral systems beyond the Vortian drift, the Accord remnants were gathering. A council of last resorts. The Desperate Dozen, they called themselves. Leaders, generals, and scholars from the few remaining powerful species that hadn't yet been touched by Earth's wrath. They had no illusions. Earth was not an enemy they could destroy. It was no longer just a planet. It was a conscious vengeance operating through bloodlines, data streams, ecosystems, and memory. So they proposed something radical. Appeasement. Not surrender, not friendship, but tribute. They began construction of a monument, a floating structure half the size of a moon, built to resemble Earth's pre-slavery continents. Inside, they housed Earth's entire archived history: languages, music, literature, films, artwork. They called it the Archive of Atonement, a gift, a bribe. But they were fools, because Earth didn't want monuments. Earth wanted justice. So when the archive was unveiled and broadcast across the stars, Earth did not send a response. But an old radio frequency, long dead, crackled to life on every system. The sound of a woman crying, then laughing. Then the broadcast ended with 3 words: "We remember everything." And then, over the course of 72 hours, every major shipyard used to build the archive collapsed into itself, without a single detonation. They didn't explode. They were turned inside out. But the real turning point, the moment the galaxy realized that nothing could stop what Earth had become, came with the collapse of Zelvoria. Zelvoria was a fortress world. 10 layers of defense grids, planetary shields powered by black hole siphons, a fleet of 400 capital ships in orbit. They were prepared for anything, except guilt. At midnight, local time, every human slave on the planet, nearly 70,000, stood still, silent, as one. And they sang, a lullaby, in English, in Russian, in Yoruba, in Mandarin, in Navajo. Languages thought extinct, languages no one had taught them, the same melody, in different tongues, at once. The sound cracked the defensive grid. Literally, the harmonic frequencies overwhelmed the planetary AI. Then Earth spoke, through every speaker, every screen, every surface. You caged the flame, and now you live in its light. The shields fell, the ships turned, and the planet itself began to sink into its own core, pulled by gravity that had been silently reprogrammed by Earth-born engineers hiding within its crust for 2 decades. No invaders arrived, no soldiers landed. The planet simply ceased to be. The remaining species did the only thing they could. They ran. To the corners of the galaxy, to unexplored systems, to hidden moon bases. But Earth still found them, because Earth had stopped being physical. It was now encoded in the fabric of the galactic net. Its voice echoed in navigation systems, its memories corrupted long-range jump drives, its vengeance lived in the frequencies of dark space. And in every child born of humanity's blood, Earth breathed. But amidst the darkness, a question began to rise. How far would Earth go? Would it stop once the guilty were gone? Or had vengeance become a cycle with no end? Even among the reclaimed, there were whispers of unease, of Earth growing colder, less human, more something else. Was this justice? Or was Earth becoming the very tyrant it had once suffered under? Even Ran Solain, the daughter of the Scream, began to wonder. She stood at the edge of Earth's core spire, where the planet's sentience pulsed like a heart, and asked the question aloud. When do we stop, Mother? The ground did not answer, but the wind carried a scent, salt, fire, and flowers growing from graves. And Rain understood. Earth would stop only when the galaxy remembered what it tried to forget. Only when every species that had once watched, voted, or remained silent, had felt even a fraction of the helplessness Earth endured. Only then would Earth rest. Far beyond the reach of most star charts, in a quadrant abandoned by trade and diplomacy, floated the Celeste Archive, a bastion of memory curated by the Aresh Collective, a once neutral species that had quietly stored knowledge from every civilization without ever interfering in galactic politics. The Aresh had not voted in the Accord. They hadn't even attended the sessions. Their motto, carved into the walls of their crystalline halls, was, "We observe, not judge." But Earth had reached them too. Because Earth had learned something crucial over the centuries of chains. Silence is complicity, and the Watchers, those who stood by while the fire was smothered, had chosen a side, whether they spoke or not. It began with a flicker in the Celeste Archive's memory streams. Names began to vanish, not erased, but bled out, like ink soaked through paper. Videos of human history stored in containment drives were corrupted not by malware, but by something organic, a pulse, a rhythm, as if the very data had remembered pain. The Aresh panicked. Their servers had never been touched before. Their vaults had survived solar collapses. Yet now, Earth's sorrow had found them. And in the final image broadcast from the archive before total system collapse, one phrase repeated, echoing in dozens of dead human languages. You archived our suffering. You profited from our pain. Now you will feel the weight of memory. Earth's wrath no longer struck just the body. It targeted legacy. Entire empires vanished not in war, but in reputation death. Records rewritten. Statues melted, names forgotten. Whole species woke up to find their cultural centers blank, their ancestral lines scrubbed from every galactic registry. The Shatar dynasty, once boasting a 10,000-year lineage, opened its vaults to find blank scrolls, empty holocrystals, and their royal crest replaced by an image of Earth burning with blue fire. The entire dynasty collapsed within days, not from attack, but from shame, their citizens revolting, unwilling to live under a banner now branded by Earth as silent collaborators. The galaxy began to understand. Earth was not just destroying the body, it was unmaking legacy itself. On a distant trade moon named Mercallum, hidden deep in the uncharted trough, a fringe scientist named Dr. Niros Talak claimed he had found a way to disconnect a species from Earth's memory field. His invention, a device called the remitter, designed to break the frequency humans had embedded into every layer of galactic technology. To test it, he used the remitter on a captured human child, a reclaimed boy no older than 9. The child was quiet, calm. He didn't resist. He simply stared. When Talak activated the device, the lab went dark for 6 hours. When power returned, all 42 staff members were dead. Not torn, not burned, just gone from time. The building stood as it was, untouched. And the boy? Still sitting in the same chair, still silent. But now humming an Earth lullaby. The remitter was never recovered. Talak's data was found etched into the lab walls in blood. You cannot unremember us. There were whispers now of something deeper than echo units or reclaimed operatives. Something older than Earth's anger. Something Earth had hidden, even from its own children. They called it the First Flame. According to intercepted human transmissions, encrypted, half-corrupted, and buried in folk songs passed through generations, the First Flame wasn't a person or a place. It was Earth's original response. The moment it realized the galaxy would not help, the moment every signal it sent for mercy went unanswered, the moment it saw its children torn from the soil and sold like ore. In that moment, Earth did something no planet had ever done. It created will. The First Flame was that will, a seed of intent buried deep in the planet's molten core, burning hotter than its mantle, untouched by time. It began whispering to the humans who were stolen, who had nothing left but anger and sorrow. It didn't ask for rebellion. It grew it, in their minds, in their blood, in their silence. And now the First Flame was rising again. But this time it wasn't whispering. It was calling. Aboard the human ship Epitaph Rising, orbiting the fractured remains of Joran Kell, a planet wiped clean by Earth's judgment, a reclaimed named Captain Idris Vane stood before his crew. They weren't soldiers, not in the traditional sense. One was a former slave librarian. Another, a mechanic who had been deaf since birth and communicated through rhythmic taps. Their pilot had once mined uranium on a gravity-locked rock with no sun. Each bore scars not of battle, but of history, and each carried part of Earth within them. Vane stared out the viewport, watching the remains of the once proud Joran capital float like ash across the stars. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply said, "We never asked for this." The crew nodded, understanding. They weren't killers. They were mirrors. Every planet they burned had once watched Earth suffer, and now Earth watched back. But something had changed. Rain Celine, now considered Earth's speaker, had begun to dream in colors that didn't exist. She saw shapes without geometry, places that weren't real, but felt remembered. She knew the first flame was speaking to her now. It no longer whispered of justice. It whispered of cleansing, of wiping the slate, not just of the guilty, but of everyone who had inherited silence. Rayan was afraid, not of Earth's power, but that its vengeance might never stop. She stood before the core spire, that living monument of data and soil, root and stone, and placed her hand against its surface. "Enough," she said softly. "Please, Mother." "We've made them remember. You can rest now." But the spire pulsed once, then again, and her hand burned, not in pain but in rejection. Earth did not speak, but it answered. "You were never made to end this. You were made to witness it." At that moment, across the galaxy, every Earth-born frequency surged. Hospitals powered down. Satellites turned their dishes toward Earth involuntarily. Stars flickered in synchronization with Earth's rotation. And in the quiet station orbiting Delphir's ring, a blind child who had never seen Earth cried tears of soil. The flame had awakened fully. The final wave was coming. Across the remnants of the Accord, despair took hold. Some begged, some surrendered, others tried to forget Earth, deleting it from their records, their maps, even their language. But forgetting Earth had never been the problem. The problem was Earth never forgot them, and now it carried that memory across every crack in space, with its reclaimed, with its silence, with its flame. It had become the reckoning made real. The stars began to pulse. No one could explain it at first. Not the astrophysicists of the Krelax Dominion, not the time mappers of the Gintheri Cloud, not even the synthetic prophets from the archive of Null. But across all sectors, all systems, from the core worlds to the outer dust belts, the stars blinked in perfect sync, every 72 seconds. Not randomly, not chaotically, deliberately, as if the galaxy itself had become a heart, and Earth was its beat. For those who had been watching closely, it wasn't just light. The blinks were binary. And when decoded through the old human languages, long since banned in most parts of the Accord, they formed a sentence. "We are awake. We are memory. We are the fire your silence fed." There was no doubt now. The first flame had risen, not as myth, not as story, but as a force, real and planetary, that now reached into the very structure of space itself. Back on Earth, the core spire glowed brighter than ever before. Rivers flowed uphill. The skies above old Africa swirled with aurora even in daylight. Forests bloomed across deserts in seconds. Mountain ranges shifted silently, responding to the planet's will like muscles flexing beneath skin. Rayan Celine stood at the edge of what had once been Nairobi. Now it was called Origin, a city with no streets, no buildings, no machines, just life. Vines shaped like memories. Crystals grown from tears, birds that sang in lost languages, trees that hummed lullabies in frequencies only the reclaimed could feel in their bones. This was Earth's new capital, not for rulers, not for armies, but for witnesses. And Rain was its last daughter. She was the only one the flame would still speak to. But even that bond was fading. The Earth was no longer asking her to understand. It was preparing her to say goodbye. The reclaimed felt it too. In the depths of space, aboard ancient stations once built to break human minds, they woke with heat in their veins. Their dreams burned. Their thoughts bled into each other. And everywhere, all at once, they heard the same sound. Drumming. Not drums of war, but of ritual. Something old, something final. Captain Idris Vane of Epitaph. Rising stood before a fractured star chart, its centerpiece now marked with a new symbol, Earth's flame etched in reverse spiral, curling inward instead of outward. His crew watched in silence as Idris traced the spiral with his gloved finger. "It's pulling in," he said. "Everything." "Like gravity?" asked Zell, the deaf pilot, her hand signing rapidly. Idris shook his head. "No, like a story folding in on itself." None of them spoke for a long time. Then the youngest among them, Tavi, a girl born in the tunnels of a slave mine, whispered, "Is it ending?" Idris looked at her, then at the stars blinking in rhythm beyond the viewport. "No," he said quietly. "It's remembering. And when it's done, nothing will be left to forget." Across the galaxy, empires were imploding, not from war, from collapse of meaning. The Tsarn Republic, once proud builders of genetic art and cultural museums, found their DNA archives rewritten overnight. Statues turned to stone faces of humans, their history books flipped to blank pages. Their AI guides began reciting the Nuremberg trials, the Tulsa massacre, Hiroshima, and other earthborn atrocities, not as events, but as hymns. Citizens panicked. Children cried as their own names faded from official documents. Entire civilizations were being unauthored. They hadn't just lost a war, they had lost their right to be remembered. In the vast cloud of Itheron, deep beyond even Earth's oldest reach, the last living Accord founder, Cyril de Norkai of the Mir Vex, hid within a time-locked vault. She had voted yes. She had signed the slavery into law. And for nearly 200 years, she had avoided Earth's vengeance by detaching herself from physical space. Her consciousness floated in a quantum state, unreachable by physical means. But the flame didn't need bodies. It only needed memory, and memory lived even in light. The vault's internal suns began blinking. Cyril watched, helpless as the message etched itself into the mirrored walls of her prison. "We were not yours to cage. Now you are not yours to save." Then the light folded, not shattered, folded like paper creasing into itself. And her mind collapsed inward, not from pain, but from understanding, the realization that Earth had not only survived the cage, it had become the key that unlocked all others. On Earth, Rain walked into the core spire for what she knew would be the last time. The structure hummed now. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of the stars. She placed her hand against it, and this time, Earth spoke, not through language, through vision. She saw. The day the first child was dragged from a burning Earth city and sold as labor stock to the outer moons. The silent rebellion on Tarsus 9, when a song broke chains across 1,000 minds. The eyes of a girl in a cell who whispered, "I am the last seed," before being spaced by her captors. The faces of those who voted, smiling, sipping nectar wine, believing Earth was too wild to tame and therefore better used. And then Rayan saw herself, not as she was now, but as what Earth had made her. A vessel, a speaker, a witness, and now a closer. Earth's voice, ancient and slow, thundered inside her chest. We were born in fire. We were chained in silence. We rose in memory. Now, we return to flame. Rayan understood. The first flame wasn't just vengeance, it was closure. And the galaxy had one final lesson to learn, that you cannot enslave a planet without becoming a footnote in its survival. Across the known universe, the blink stopped. No more 72-second pulses. Silence, and then one last signal, from Earth, from the flame, from everything that had burned and endured. Let the stars forget, we never will. Every map bearing Earth's name disintegrated. Every digital copy of the Accord Treaty melted from servers and databanks. Entire star systems lost access to Earth's coordinates, not jammed, not encrypted, just erased. Earth was gone, not destroyed, withdrawn. A world that had survived slavery, betrayal, silence, and the cold logic of fear had now chosen something no species expected: to leave, to step outside time, memory, and space. To carry its fire where no record could trace it. Captain Idris Vane stood on the bridge of Epitaph Rising as their navigational systems scrambled to locate Earth. Nothing. Not even residue. Zell's hands trembled as she signed. Where did she go? Idris looked out the viewport. The stars were still. The rhythm had ended. The silence was complete. He exhaled. She went where justice doesn't need to be watched, he said. Where memory can rest, where grief can finally sleep. He turned. Earth is free. But across the stars, as silence settled, something else began to grow. Not fear, not rebellion, but shame, real shame. Species wept. Children asked why their parents had let it happen. Books were written, statues erected, not of conquerors, but of human children, of voices that were ignored, of pain that went unheard. For the first time in galactic history, entire planets began teaching empathy as law. Not by command, but by memory. Because even in her absence, Earth had left behind one final truth. If you forget the enslaved, you become the cage. It had been 16 galactic cycles since Earth vanished. No one had seen its surface, its flame-born ships, or even a fragment of its frequency. It was as if the planet had never existed. A memory forcibly removed from the very architecture of the universe, but like a scar beneath smooth skin, Earth's presence lingered in ways no empire could ignore. Silence itself had changed. Before, silence was used to suppress, to ignore injustice, to stand by. Now, silence carried weight, the weight of grief, of guilt, of lessons carved into the very starlight. Children across thousands of systems no longer studied Earth as a threat. They studied it as a warning. It was no longer labeled a war criminal or a rogue planet. Now it was recorded in hushed tones as the world that remembered. And that memory had become a kind of religion. On the remote moon of Thal Vox, the descendants of species once complicit in the Accord gathered around a structure known only as the Grave of Names. Built from shattered orbit mines and melted slave collars, the monument bore no words, only thousands of glowing handprints pressed into stone, each representing a life lost during the enslavement era. Every year, on the day of silence, mourners stood before the grave. They didn't pray. They didn't speak. They listened, not to sound, but to the ache left behind by Earth's fire. This wasn't penance. It wasn't atonement. It was the only thing left when forgiveness had never been asked for. And yet, Earth's absence was not complete. Sometimes, on ghost frequencies, people claimed to hear the heartbeat, a slow, low thrum, like the pulse of something ancient just beneath reality. Engineers couldn't trace it. Scientists called it residual energy. But survivors, especially the reclaimed, knew better. That heartbeat was Earth's way of watching. Ryan Solene, who had once stood as Earth's speaker, now lived alone on a floating monastery orbiting a dead star. She had not spoken in years, not out of pain, but out of respect. The Earth no longer spoke to her, not through the spire, not through dreams, but every night she felt the warmth, not from a sun, not from fire, from within. She would place her hand over her chest, where a faint ember of the first flame still glowed, and remember the last words the core had spoken to her. When they forget, we return. That was Earth's final condition. Not peace, not rest, just waiting. The galaxy changed in Earth's wake. For some species, the absence of punishment brought relief. For others, it brought emptiness. And for a rare few, it brought resolve. On the planet Dovrix-Ko, the once brutal leaders of the Drenthari Dominion converted their fortress into a university for historical justice. They taught courses on the dangers of democratic oppression and empathy in empire building. They dismantled their entire military structure, leaving only rescue ships and translators. Elsewhere, the Filari, once a trading power that profited off human labor, created the Echo Codex, a digital tome storing every known act of resistance by enslaved humans, accessible on every galactic device. Its first page read, "We benefited from their chains. We now serve by lifting others from them." It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever would be. But Earth hadn't asked for perfection. Only memory. But not all had changed. Beneath the distant rings of Corvus, a shadow had begun to stir. The Threxan Syndicate, long believed destroyed during Earth's vengeance years, had survived, its leaders scattered, hiding in lawless sectors. They had never accepted the shame of defeat. They believed Earth's disappearance was a bluff, a trick, a scare tactic. To them, Earth was a ghost that had overplayed its hand. And now, with time and silence dulling fear, they believed they could rise again. A new leader emerged, Vorik Tal-Naresh, born to a family of slavers, raised on bitterness, and fed a steady diet of anti-Earth propaganda. He wore a necklace made from melted pieces of broken reclaimed tech. He called himself the Flame Eater. He broadcast one message on the galaxy's public network, raw, unencrypted, violent. The humans hid. Their world ran. But we are not afraid. The next time Earth shows its face, we'll break it. The message spread like wildfire. Some denounced it. Others cheered. Not everyone had learned. Not everyone had paid attention. The children of the Accord were growing up, and some of them were being taught the wrong stories. Rayan saw the message. It reached her through broken comms, her first transmission in decades. She didn't move at first, didn't speak. She simply stared at the screen, watching Vorik's face twist with arrogance. Then she stood, walked to the center of the monastery, lit a small fire, the last ember taken from Earth's core before its disappearance. The flame flickered, then blazed blue. Earth had heard, and somewhere far beyond known space, it began to stir. At the edge of the galaxy, hidden behind nebula and void storms, an ancient ship powered up for the first time in over a decade. Its name, the Silence. No crew, no bridge, only Earth's will embedded deep inside its alloy bones. A voice echoed from its hull, not a warning, a reminder. You taught us chains. Now we teach you consequence. On the lawless station of Brakor III, where Vorik had made his throne, the lights went out. Only for 3 seconds. When they returned, every wall bore the mark of Earth's flame. No one had heard a ship arrive. No one had seen a breach. But Earth didn't arrive in metal anymore. It arrived in shadows, in guilt, in the space where you think you're safe. Within hours, 3 of Vorik's lieutenants were found dead, eyes burned out, Hearts turned to ash, but no external wounds. The weapons used? None found. The time of death? Identical. Exact. 3:33 or 33 Galactic Standard Time. The number of the vote, 333 species, 333 votes in favor. 0 against, 0 abstained, 0 opposed. That number had become Earth's judgment time, a digital countdown that flashed across terminals in the criminal underworld. Those who saw it had only hours to disappear, and even then, Earth would find them. Rayan knew what came next. Not war, not vengeance, cleansing. The first flame had been quiet out of mercy. Now that mercy had expired. She recorded a message, her first in over 20 years, and she broadcast it across all frequencies. A simple message, free of politics, blame, or hate. Only truth. You had time to learn. You had time to mourn. You had time to become more. Now, the fire returns, not to punish, but to purify. Remember Earth. Remember what you voted for. On 100 systems, on 1,000 worlds, screens flickered. Children who had grown up hearing only rumors now saw the truth. Footage long buried, of human children in chains, of burning cities, of scientists executed for resisting the Accord. The truth poured out like a dam had cracked. Because Earth wasn't coming back for revenge, it was coming back for the next generation, to make sure they never forgot. And in the dark, beneath dying stars and corrupt governments still clinging to silence, the flame whispered again. Not through war, not through chaos, but through clarity, through the memory of chains, through the pain that shaped a species, through the children born in silence who now carried Earth's roar inside them. Because the fire had waited long enough, the galaxy was quiet again. But it wasn't peace. It was the hush that comes when breath is held. When millions sense a shift in the air that cannot be seen, only felt, deep beneath the skin, in the marrow of memory. For those old enough to remember, this silence was familiar. It was the same silence that fell just before Earth screamed. And now, it was about to speak again. The reclamation flame lit up across the stars, not from ships, not from armies, but from people. Humans long thought lost. Forgotten, enslaved, or dead began to rise. Not in violence, but in presence. Farmers, mechanics, poets, children born on prison moons, grandmothers who once buried their sons in the dirt of alien soil. They came out of hiding and began building something. Not cities, not monuments. They began building memory stations, each station crafted from raw, Earth-like materials, wood, soil, steel. Some floated in space, others were planted deep into alien ground. They weren't guarded, they weren't protected. But anyone who tried to destroy them vanished. No fire, no body, just gone. As if memory itself had wiped them from existence. Because that's what the first flame had become now. Living memory. Earth hadn't returned as a planet. It had returned as a system, a presence encoded in every survivor, every song, every whisper that once echoed through the tunnels of slave ships. It lived in rhythm, in language, in fire, in truth. And now, it would finish what it started. On the outer edge of the Zarkon cluster, Vorik Tal Naresh, the so-called Flame Eater, rallied his remaining loyalists in a fortress carved into the bones of a dying star. He had amassed the last vestiges of anti-human hatred, disgraced generals, ex-slavers, propagandists, and those who had never faced the truth. Their plan was simple. Lure Earth back. Destroy it. He broadcast again, louder than before, across every public channel. We spit on your pity. We reject your fear. Come face us if you dare. The galaxy watched, held its breath, Ray and Celine saw the message and wept, not out of fear, but because she knew Earth would answer, and this time Earth would not be mercy. For 7 days, nothing happened. Vorik grew bolder, mocking Earth with holographic desecrations, images of burned human cities, fake simulations of Earth's destruction, mock trials where reclaimed were executed before cheering crowds. He believed Earth's silence was weakness, but Earth was never loud. It waited. And then, on the 8th day, just as the fortress prepared for a new broadcast, it arrived. Not a fleet, not a flame, a shadow. It was seen first by orbital telescopes as a distortion in space. A sphere, not of matter but absence, rotating impossibly, surrounded by 12 glowing rings. Each ring pulsed with a different human heartbeat, recorded from the last moments of the first enslavement. No one knew what to call it. It had no heat signature, no propulsion, yet it hovered at the edge of Zarkon space, motionless and humming. And every single system, ship, and satellite tuned into one phrase. Your legacy was written in our pain. Now your names are carved into our fire. Panic surged. The fortress activated all defenses, planetary shields, anti-phased cannons, temporal scramblers, and then Vorik fired everything, the entire might of what remained of the Accord's hatred, plasma bolts, quantum missiles, artificial black holes. They struck the shadow and passed through as if it wasn't real, or perhaps more real than they were. Then the rings moved. One by one they closed in toward the sphere, forming a sigil, an ancient symbol found only once in Earth's ruins. Never again. The rings collapsed inward. The sphere pulsed, and reality bent. Witnesses from nearby systems described it differently. Some said they saw fire. Others described a white light so pure it erased thought. A few claimed they heard music, Earth songs lost centuries ago, playing in perfect harmony. But one truth was shared by all. Zarkon burned without flame. It did not explode. It did not scream. It simply ceased to be, every trace of its fortress, hatred, and history reduced to silence. The only remnant left behind? A single ember, drifting through space, still glowing, still waiting. Rayan stood in her monastery and watched the data feeds go blank. She knew what had happened. She didn't mourn. She didn't rejoice. She simply whispered to the ember within her, "Is it done?" For the first time in years, the flame answered, not with words, but with quiet. And in that quiet, Rain understood. Earth had finished its sentence. Across the galaxy, species began their final reckoning. Not because they feared Earth's return, but because they finally believed in its message. They began to listen to the voices that had been buried for generations. They rebuilt slave zones into gardens. They handed over military budgets to education, healing, and preservation. They opened truth centers where survivors could speak freely, even if it hurt. The galaxy didn't become perfect, but it became honest. And that honesty was enough. In time, the flame receded. Memory stations were left unguarded, unmonitored, because no one dared to destroy them anymore. Not out of fear, but out of respect. New holidays were born. The Day of Flame, the Night of Silence, the Ashen Prayer. Each one not about Earth's wrath, but Earth's endurance. Generations passed. Ryan Celine passed in her sleep, her body cradled by vines that had grown from her ember. Her breath was slow, peaceful. Her last words were recorded in the still air of her garden. We were fire, we were fury, but most of all, we were never forgotten. The galaxy moved on. Stars spun, planets turned, but deep, deep in the fabric of space, Past every map and every known boundary, a single planet turned slowly, wrapped in light and soil and memory. Earth. It had not vanished. It had simply stepped away. To watch, to heal, to remain a witness long after the fire was gone. Because even when vengeance is complete, memory burns forever.
ここ喋んなかなんか。送ってくんの？送ってくるの？一瞬なんか学生を気取ってんかと思った。また年齢詐欺やるんかなと。びっくりした。学生みたいやろ。誰が